The Overwatch community has been caught in a relentless tug of war for years now, 5v5 versus 6v6. So last weekend, Blizzard threw some fuel on that fire with the Quick Play Hacked event, temporarily bringing back a 6v6 format from a new angle to test their new queue called Dynamic Queue, or their new system called Dynamic Queue. So OpenQ 6v6 has existed for quite some time now, I think since 2024, and has been growing in popularity. And according to this recent blog from July 15, 2026, you can see that 19% and 8% of players queue unranked or ranked OpenQ 6v6 daily, but 5v5 is still the large majority at 54% and 37% respectively. However, this could be due to 5v5 being offered as the main format, and if we magically, swapped all these to 6v6 as the main offering on the menu with OpenQ as 5v5 instead as a smaller side queue, the question is, would the numbers flip? Hard to say. But anyways, before we get into the weeds, let's just get all this tribalism stuff out of the way. If you're looking for a video that aggressively puts its foot down to declare one format being objectively better than the other, you're actually in the wrong video. I'm trying to offer a more nuanced, level-headed take, as I actually have thousands of hours in both formats, and I actually like both, believe it or not, but for different reasons. 5v5 is more chill for me. 6v6 is a little more chaotic, but with higher team play highs. Sometimes I like to vibe and chill in 5v5, and sometimes I actually like, getting my senses overloaded with all that visual clutter in 6v6. Anyways, my background leans heavily into the support role, probably like 4,000 hours in support, maybe 400 hours of tank, 200 hours of DPS. I just wanted to make that part clear so you can see my inherent bias. Anyways, 5v5 has been in the game for nearly 4 years now, I think October 2022, and that is a massive chunk of time. And there is a massive chunk of the player base, with many of them being newer players who genuinely prefer 5v5, and even after recently trying this OpenQ 6v6 or the 6v6 Quick Play Hacked last week with the Dynamic Queue. And a ton of my fellow creators on socials that are unbelievably 6v6 pilled actually lack so much nuance to this discussion, it actually hurts to read sometimes, especially when they say this thing about 6v6 is objectively better in 6v6, which is not just the right, I don't even know do you know what objectively means? It's still very much subjective subject and subjective discussion and experience when you seriously have 5v5ers who actually like 5v5. They just may not be as vocal about it. But in any case, this is not to disparage any of my fellow creators. We're all friends. These are just opinions on a video game. It's nothing personal. Anyways, to set this yap discussion piece up, let's actually look at the actual brief history, why we swapped from 6v6 to 5v5 first of all, and what this new recent test actually means for the future of the game. This shift to 5v5 in 2022 in Overwatch 2 was not born out of a desperate need to reinvent the gameplay wheel. It was honestly just a logistical fix. So before, in old Overwatch 1 pre-2022, DPS players were apparently sitting in an 8-minute queue on average, simply because there weren't enough tanks to fill the lobbies. Blizzard had a choice here where they either A, abandon role queue entirely, go back to the old 2016 to 2019 open queue Overwatch, but stay in the 6v6 format, or they could remove a tank slot and go to 5v5 to solve queue time problems. And yes, queue times actually matter. Maybe not to some right now who can boldly claim that they'd rather sit and wait 8 minutes for better match quality for 6v6 than be in 5v5, but long queue times are not healthy long term, and it's just not sustainable. It snowballs into players just abandoning that role entirely because they'll just never find a match in a reasonable time. The ones who can say they can sit in a queue are not the target demographic. There are people who just want to log in for a game, they just can't find a match on DPS and they just log out. That's not good for retention, and just be for real. Peer back to any of the late 2019-2020 posts and discussion, people genuinely stopped queuing the role. 2026 now, we have brain rot, TikTok Zoomers. They are not waiting 8 minutes on average for a game, and that's the average. That means sometimes it could be 15 to 20 minutes plus, and even today in 5v5, sometimes these queues are really long. And this is not for the super high-end GM champ level players. We're talking about little Timmy and Platinum getting a 15 to 20 minute queue. Not sustainable by any stretch. Anyways, back on topic, obviously Blizzard chose to keep role queue and move to 5v5. The hard truth about tanks is that they are the least popular role in virtually every gaming genre. They are thankless, they're highly pressured, and historically less satisfying for any gamer, really. You can even see it in MMOs. Tanking is just not as fun or just not as popular. That being said, one thing that a lot of people bring up, and I agree, it certainly would not have hurt to have Blizzard release more tanks to fix or adjust the ratio of heroes available in the game. If you give players more tank choices and continue to release tanks at a larger volume with a better release schedule. How many tanks do we have now? 14, and we have 20 or 30 DPSs and 14 supports. Anyways, the ratio is a bit off. Damage and support roles are more popular in tanks. It certainly wouldn't hurt, is the point I'm trying to make. to have released more tanks and prioritize releasing more tanks. Not sure how much it would actually move the needle in reality in improving the interest in the role. But again, it's just the point is that a lot of Redditors think this is the single fix alone, but in reality, it's a multi-layered problem. And again, when you solve one problem, you always introduce new problems. It is impossible to please everyone, and Blizzard needs to understand that. Anyways, let's make a little table here so you can kind of visualize the 5v5 reality versus the 6v6 nostalgia really quick. So I actually wrote a little bit of this already, but I'm going to open up this Google sheet here that kind of shows the side by side to kind of see it in a bit of an easier to digest format over here. 5v5, 6v6, queue times. 5v5 format, queue times are faster, and more mathematically sustainable. Excuse my writing, I just kind of wrote point form notes and went as quick as I could. So 5v5 queue times, let's just highlight in green, a bit better. 6v6 queue times, they are objectively longer due to the 2 tank requirement. Put that in red. Okay, the playstyle in general for 5v5, you have higher agency. You can flank, you can take off angles, and I wrote, you can aggressively playing for picks is more heavily rewarded, especially when each kill is worth 20% of the total team's output, right? You have 5 players, killing 1 is 20% of the team. This playstyle, believe it or not, is actually harder for casual players, and you don't really see like the flanking off angle stuff as often until you reach higher ranks. So again, I'm kind of just listing out the pros and cons and the realities of each of these formats here. Now in the 6v6 format, I will say that I think the playstyle is a lot more intuitive. You know, grouping up, death ball, grouping up and shooting the enemy front line is a natural and viable strategy. I call this the front to back comp. A lot of people find success. Like the easiest demonstration is something that a map that's a lot more narrow. When you play front to back and death ball, it's way more common and it gives a lot more consistent value. Going solo flanking off angle is a lot riskier because there's an extra player on the enemy team to kind of catch you. And even if you do get a pick, that solo pick is on average also a little less rewarding since it is worth 16.7% of the enemy's team compared to the 20%, right? When you do 6 players divided by 100%, or 100% divided by 6 players, you get the 16% number. Overall, the playstyle 5v5, whether people find this more fun or not, this is the subjective part in the debate. I will say 6v6, it's more intuitive, it's a bit more, I think it's actually easier for casual players, more fun for tanks for sure. Let's actually move on to the tank section here. I'm not going to highlight either because this is still a bit subjective. For tanks in 5v5, you have the high lethality raid boss feel, but it suffers from degenerate counter swapping. Okay, that's like the big common. It's a single tank. If you run to that single Mauga and you're playing a Winston, it's just not fun from the tank perspective. There's a lot of pressure to perform. If you're the bad tank or the one bad tank, it usually means you lose, and you also dictate the playstyle archetype. Because there's one tank, the tank you play kind of determines how your team should be approaching the game. If I'm a Winston one trick, my team is kind of just stuck playing a more dive-centric kind of team. If I'm a Mauga or an Orisa one trick, we're kind of playing more brawly by nature. If I'm playing a Sigma Domina, we are going to be playing poke. The tank is how the team is going to, the archetype they're going to kind of lean towards. Tanks in 6v6, there's less individual pressure. Tank synergies are the big thing though. Tank synergies return and can create really, really fun moments, and people live for this feeling. Tank players live for this feeling. More potential combos, releases way more dopamine and very creative sequences. The downside is obviously tanks have less HP, so you can get punished way more if they haven't adapted. Especially those who only played Overwatch 2 5v5 and they go to 6v6. The less HP pool, they're not adapted. They're playing into the open because they're not super tanks anymore, is the point I was trying to make here. Anyways, let's go back to 5v5. I do think in 5v5, the damage heroes have a lot higher carry potential and freedom. You can take flanks on not even like flanking heroes like Tracer. You can sort of flank on a lot more heroes. Soldier and anybody really, and it's way easier to interact with the enemy backline, the enemy supports. However, sometimes the damage roll can feel weak or a cosmetic roll. That's what you hear sometimes from DPS players because of that one super tank to burn through, or that one super tank influencing the game more, or even like support ultimates being so high impact that it just sometimes feels like the damage roll doesn't do much. Feels like. This is again the subjective part of the game. Now in 6v6, the damage roll back in the day, especially into certain metas and double shield, it could feel like a shield shooting simulator. Sometimes you'd even just drop the extra DPS and play like the triple support, goats, 3 tanks, 3 supports, or the 2-1-3, 2 tanks, 1 DPS, 3 supports. Especially, I wrote this part, especially in double shield meta. It's in general, it is probably a little bit harder to take super aggressive off angles because they have that extra 6th player peeling. Maybe the off tank Diva, because there's 2 tanks. They play Winston Diva instead of the Diva diving with the Winston. The Diva actually chills back, and then you as a DPS player can't take, certain flanks and can't reach their backline as easily because there's that extra player to worry about. However, it's a bit more forgiving of individual mistakes if you play the damage roll. Sometimes, like, if you mess up, it's not too big of a deal. You're the rest of your team. There's so many players still. You could probably still win the team fight more often than not. And unfortunately, the same problem persists. It can still feel weak or cosmetic, role. You have to chew through 2 tanks to make meaningful pushes, but I guess they die because the tanks have less HP. But overall, could feel even weaker. Now for the support role, I think in 5v5 you have much more freedom to flank and play aggressive to secure value. I think TikTok Moiras were born in Overwatch 2, unless I was just not part of the knowers in Overwatch 1. I didn't really see much flanking Moira back in the day, but as soon as Overwatch 2 came out, flanking Moiras were everywhere. And I know this as an Ana player in 5v5, I am able to kind of just look away for a sec. My one super tank can kind of hold themselves, sustain themselves for a bit, and I'll just, like, you know, walk over to the side and get a little cheeky angle on Ana, a little cheeky sleep, a little cheeky nade. But however, in 6v6 support perspective, it's a bit more heal body. This is the common sentiment. I personally feel like this is how it is for me as well. Not to say that you have to heal bot. You can, like, make high IQ plays and high value plays going on an off angle as a TikTok, as a Moira, as a Kiri, as an Ana. But in general, I'm a firm believer that as a support role, heal botting in 6v6 or focusing on healing a bit more creates more easier and consistent value than the higher risk off angle plays. Obviously in 6v6 you have that extra 6th player to heal, that extra tank player, and if you look away for a brief moment, it can sometimes feel like that extra tank player explodes. It obviously doesn't help that in this quick play hacked event, those 5v5s who are playing it temporarily were not using cover at all, being used to the super tank and blah 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 blah. Blame gets thrown around. Oh, why aren't you healing me? Stop going on the angle, blah blah blah. Anyways, this is just this whole table is just kind of the breakdown, at least how I've seen it on socials and personal anecdote and experience. If you agree or disagree with any of this kind of stuff, you know, feel free to comment it as well. I'm here again for a more level-headed discussion. No rose tinted glass saying this format is objectively better. It's not. Like, fun is subjective at the end of the day. Anyways, with the pros and cons listed out, this brings us back to that recent quick play hacked test weekend we just had. Blizzard knows they can't please everyone, but enough time has passed that there is serious discussion about changing the main format back to 6v6. But how do you bring that back as the main format without bringing back 8-minute queue timers and without bringing back that true open queue 6v6 we have, where people kind of always remember that the outlier bad comps where you can run into like 0 tanks, 5 DPS, 1 support. So the dynamic queue solution in this recent playtest, where just happened, if you were not playing Overwatch for the past few days, basically for 5 days, I think from last Thursday to Sunday, the matchmaker will default to find a standard 222 roll queue search. If finding the tank takes too long, they call it a release valve activates, which allows the match to form by only finding 1 tank and creating a 1-3-2 comp, 1 tank, 3 DPS, 2 supports, with the option of that 1 DPS player swapping to tank if they want to play 2-2-2. It honestly is a pretty good compromise. It aims to eliminate the truly bad and unplayable games of that 0 tank, 5 DPS, 1 support. It gets rid of triple support, which is also a problem in itself. It's kind of what spawned goats, to be honest with you, while mathematically keeping queue times not faster than true 5v5, but a little bit faster, kind of like a middle ground where the queue times will be a bit longer than current 5v5, but it won't be as bad as it was back in 2019, 2020 or whatnot. But let's talk about this playtest this past weekend, the reality check. How did it play in practice? The short answer was a bit of a mess, but I think they did take a lot of it away from it. So I heard from you guys when I asked this question in chat last week, along with some discussion on socials as well. Overall, the weekend was a bit of a disaster in one because the game has been balanced for 5v5 over the past 3.5-4 years. We have heroes with like back in the day, heroes on, like, let's just say an average squishy hero was 200 HP. A lot of them are sitting at 225 or 250. Healing is a lot lower because of the healing reduction global passive. They just nerfed it in this recent quick play hack test, but it's still noticeable. There's also bad habits from the tank players who've been playing for the past 3.5 years of 5v5 only. The tanks were exploding in 6v6 because they weren't used to using cover, or they're just used to the larger HP pool. I mentioned this a lot. They expected to survive on those raw stats alone. I think some of the more recent maps as well felt a little claustrophobic. I think Push is a really good example. I don't feel like Flashpoint is as bad. I'm used to the scrappier control and there's a lot more angles, but whenever I played like New Queen Street in 6v6 or Esperanza, it just feels really claustrophobic. I'm just gonna say the word again, really tight. It just didn't, I don't know, really scrappy in a small area. But anyways, Push is the big one for me. That's how it felt. And then of course, queue times. How were the queue times for you guys? Unfortunately, I need to defer this to you because during the quick play hacked event last week, I 6-stacked with viewers the whole time, and they weren't bad at all. But we were 6-stacked and we always had 2 tanks, and we didn't have to do that whole release valve of 1-3-2. And I think almost every opponent we played against did happen to also be 2-2-2, but I'm not sure if they started with 1-3-2 or not. But they weren't bad. I would say the longest queues we had at maybe at 2 or 3 in the morning on one of the days was maybe 3 to 4 minutes. But maybe I did ask. I think some people said for some of the DPS and support queues, solo queue, quick play hack, they were already starting to approach like the 7-minute mark. Some people had some crazy outliers at even 10 minutes, but I don't think that mathematically was consistent, right? I think it was just maybe off hours, and that's just like a person saying that's the one they remember. But a majority of queue times should have been a little bit better, was the reality of it. But overall, I did think this queue times were starting to creep up near the end of the event, when people were starting to go back to ranked and avoid the quick play hack because maybe they already just didn't like the 6v6 format. Adding that extra tank required to make the lobby with the 2-2-2 at the beginning will always increase queue times unless the player base ratio magically shifts. So I guess all this to say, in conclusion, if I'm gonna make the opinion for you, form your opinion for you, excuse me. Blizzard's just trying to figure out how to keep the most players happy, because at the end of the day, their interests are similar to mine. They just want people playing the game. More people playing the game means more money in their pockets if people buy skins and they're happier. You can't please everybody. You just got to please the right crowd. And then same for me. Listen, I got to make money too. More people watching videos, I'm cool with it. Like I said, I like both formats for different reasons. And I also like people enjoying and being happy about the game, which means I get more eyeballs on my content, streams, YouTube, which means I can feed my dog more treats. I can spoil her a little bit more, and she's a needy husky. 5v5 again was a logistical necessity that kind of evolved into a format that a lot of players do genuinely love, but it kind of made some of the old heads a little bit unhappy because they remembered how fun 6v6 was back in the day. And 6v6 did have that undeniable magic and its tank synergies, intuitive team fights, but again, it came with the harsh logistical realities. Ultimately, to me, Overwatch is a better game when it has options, and I think having both playlists, is that something we can have? Right now, we have open queue 6v6, but it's kind of like the side format. If there was a way to kind of offer both as the main experience, even the casual players who clock in and clock out, they will also opt to pick both, or maybe let us multi-queue in the systems where I can click both queues and queue 2 things at the same time and just play whatever shows up. It will come with a lot more things they need to do. They definitely need to do a whole balanced tune over and pass over to kind of make it way more viable. Again, it's not fun playing into Malga Hog in the current 6v6 format and yada yada yada, but variety of playable modes might be the exact thing this community needs. But again, like I said, can't solve every problem. Every problem will introduce new problems, right? Or solving one problem introduces new ones. Let's have both formats, main formats, balance for both. Great. Now what's the new problem? You're fragmenting the player base. You're splitting people off into more queues, which means less people populate the 5v5 or 6v6 overall because you're kind of 2 in 1. Will the queue times get even longer because people aren't forced or incentivized to play one or the other? It's tough. Queue times are important. Gameplay feel is important. And hopefully, we land on a solution that ends up working for both. I say right now, we've been in 5v5 for a while. You can just bite the bullet and go back straight 6v6 and try it. Try this out. I didn't mind it at all. Or try really doing both outside of the open queue 6v6. Try hard roll queue 5v5 and hard dynamic queue 2-2-2, 1-3-2, 6v6 at the same time and just see what happens is what I would say. Anyways, that's my opinion on it. Feel free to have very civil and nice, constructive discussions in the comments. I would like to take a look at them, maybe add some more to it, especially in the hot takes video afterwards. But that's my perspective. Hopefully you don't have to agree with me. I really don't care if you do or not, but maybe it'll spark something meaningful and productive. That's all I have to say. Okay, goodbye.